If you watched my wargame reviews in the past, you may know that I'm a big fan of block wargames. That simply is one of my favorite mechanics in wargaming because of how elegant it is, how good it looks on the board, but especially because of the large amount of information that is inscribed in the game pieces and that is easily accessible to the players during gameplay. It just feels intuitive. There's just a lot that you can have on those game pieces without making a gameplay cumbersome. So I played many games by Columbia Wargames in the past. They specialize in this style of game. Strangely enough, a game that I owned but had not played is Pacific Victory. This is in my collection and I don't know why I neglected it. I forgot that I had it maybe. I was reminded of it now that the second edition of Pacific Victory came out. And this one, yes, this one I did play, and this is the one that I'm going to show you in the game and tell you about. I will not be able to compare with the previous edition because, again, I haven't tried it, but I can tell about this one. So, Pacific Victory, it is a game about World War II. It is about the Pacific Theater of Operations depicted at the strategic level. So it really shows a large chunk of our planet from India to the west coast of the United States. So really ambitious scale, because of course there's a lot of different elements that such a huge operation or net of operations entails. Plays for 2 players mainly, but it is also playable by a single player with, of course, some loss of secrecy, of stealth, but is not, I believe, an immense loss. The game is still playable even in that fashion. Without further ado, let me show you how Pacific Victory works. The board of the game is printed on sturdy cardboard, and I apologize in advance for the little bit of glare that you see here and then you may see later. I'm filming in my in-laws basement because we are traveling for Thanksgiving break these days, and so I don't have a lot of choice when it comes to where the lights are and stuff like that. In any case, the board of the game shows us, well, a considerable chunk of our planet really goes from the west coast of the US to India. It really gives you a sense of the scale of the enormous size of this theater of operations. The map is divided in large hexes, large enough to hold a large, I would say a good number of wooden blocks, and definitely it is very playable that way. It is also very readable, very functional. As you can imagine, if you are playing the campaign game that starts in December 1941, the Japanese player will be setting up in this area here, but also here and here on the east side of the Asian main continent, and they will be ready because of their position to invade in one or multiple directions. A lot of options on where to push initially for the Japanese player. The ally player will have Chinese forces there, then there will be Commonwealth forces set up here, and American forces set up in this area here. This is a block war game. That means the military units in the game are represented by wooden blocks that have a sticker attached to them to indicate what kind of unit that is and the capabilities of the unit. And the game comes with a big, healthy bunch of blocks that represent different types of military units. When we're talking about the Pacific, well, it's a very complete theater of operations. You have them all, from the air to the water, underwater, land operations, etc., etc. And so here we have ships, we have aircraft, we have land units, submarines are somewhere on there, trust me, they're there. Now, as in many other wooden block games, the idea is that the units will be standing on the board facing the owning player, like so. That means that the other player sees the back of your units, sees where your units are, but does not know what those units are. And then you will move units that way, and when it comes time to resolve combat, then players will reveal their units and combat will be resolved. Also, as a wooden cube stands the number of dots that you see on top, depending on the side that the cube is standing on, will indicate the number of strength points that the unit has. For example, this one has 4. If it takes a hit, it goes down to 3. Then maybe another hit goes down to 2. Maybe gets then replacements, and it goes back to 3, and so on and so forth. Very simple, very economic way of keeping track of a lot of information. If the unit is at 1 and takes a hit, it is removed. Other information that you see here, you see a letter that indicates the order in which units will attack, and they attack in alphabetical order. A first, B next, E last, and the other letters in between in order. Also, within each letter rank, the defender will usually resolve combat before the attacker. So first, all of the A of the defender, then A of the attacker, B of the defender, B of the attacker, and so on and so forth. As you can see, it's a simple way to really keep track of how different units involved in the Pacific War will operate, with the aircraft getting a first strike, and then with aircraft, and finally, after possibly other people go, with the poor infantry that just attacks last. Here you have 3 numbers, and again that has to do with the variety of different targets that they were there. In fact, those represents the number to hit when resolving combat against air units, naval units, and ground units. Some units may be good at all of them, some units better of attacking air and naval, but not so much ground, because the higher the number, the better. In fact, to resolve combat, what you do when a unit is resolving combat, you roll a number of dice equal to the number of strength points, for example 4 in this case, and you score a hit for each number that you roll, which is equal to or lower than the number for the unit that you are attacking. So when this one is, in this case, the unit would roll 4 dice and would score a hit against air units for each 1, 2, or 3, against the naval for each 1, 2, or 3, and against land units only on a 1 or a 2. And pretty much explain, well, a lot of how combat works. Now, at the beginning of each turn, the players roll dice to determine initiative. The player with initiative decides who goes first. Then the player who goes first will move any and all of the units that they want to move, and there are different types of movement available. There is regular movement, which is usually 1 or 2 axes. Again, remember, this is a really large scale. 1 or 2 axes is a lot of space. Then we have the possibility of rebasing. That means you're moving a unit to a friendly base, in which case you can use double movement. Also, you may activate an headquarter and spend a strength point to represent strategic movement, and in this case you can move a unit up to 10 hexes. I'm putting things out a little bit randomly, but it gives you a sense of how things may look like, cool block games are, in case you're not familiar with the idea already. So a player will get to move. So a player will move, and then the other player gets to move. Now, the first player may have entered areas containing enemy units, in which case, when the second player goes, in each hex where there are blocks of the opponent, a number of units is pinned down, a number equal to that of the opponent. For example, here we have 2 units. That means that I cannot move 2 of my units out. In this case, if I am the second player and I want to move units out, I can't. Suppose, however, that my opponent has entered that area with 2 blocks. Now it's my turn to move. Those 2 blocks are pinning down only 2 of my units, and so I can move another one out if I so desire. Very important idea. So first a player will move, and then the other player will move, keeping in mind those restrictions. The second player can also enter areas that the enemy has entered before, and that means that the second player may start
a new combat, may start a new fight, like in that case, or may reinforce a previous one. In which case the units that are entering to reinforce will only the fight will only start to really be effective starting from the second round of combat. So that's the idea. Player 1 moves, player 2 moves, and then you resolve combat in all of the axes that at that point have units of both sides. What happens here is that, again, pretty much, you reveal the blocks the way I showed you, and then you roll dice starting with the units labeled with A and then B and so on and so forth. Each hit reduces a block of the opponent, and yet there are a couple of rules about who can target whom. Usually a unit can target enemy units of the same type, air versus air, land versus land, but there are a couple of other restrictions. Say, for example, land units can attack air units or naval units only in retaliation, that is, if they're being attacked before. Otherwise, they don't like to do that as much. And also, naval units, same idea, can attack air units if they have been attacked. So there are a couple of these if-then conditions that regulate who can attack whom. And so you resolve a round of combat in which, remember, the defender attacks first, inflicts hits, and then the attacker gets to roll within that range. So again, very important, because that may reduce the number of dice that you roll. After a round of combat, the second round starts. Reinforcements that were placed there enter the fight in earnest. Another important thing is that players may decide to retreat instead of attacking. When a unit would activate, again in the alphabetical order, the unit can decide to retreat instead of fighting. There are also a couple of other wrinkles here. For example, there's a possibility using raid movement. When you perform a raid, you will attack an enemy, but in typical hit and run fashion, you will attack the enemy. You will get to roll before the defender, but after that one hit, you have to leave, you have to retreat, and that really makes sense. Another thing that can happen as a consequence of combat, you may have a blockade. That is, a player may decide to retreat their naval units to a different area of the same hex in which the fight happens, and so you have that shared situation in which one player is controlling the sea and the other player is controlling the land, and that may be a very effective way of blocking supplies to a land area, which can be pretty deadly. This pretty much is mainly the main idea of the game. Move, player 1 moves, player 2 moves, resolve combat, repeat. Another important element, of course, is production. You see that there are several areas on the board that have numbers indicated there. Those are production areas. They will, in fact, generate the production points. Say this is another, these are the examples. They generate production points. At the end of the round, the player will spend those production points to build new units or to replenish depleted units, again simply by turning them by 90 degrees. And there is a cost for each type of unit, a different cost in terms of steps, and here you have a player rate that is very useful for that. There are also rules to take weather into account, of course, rules for supply lines. Those are super important, but I think in general you got the gist of the game. The game is played until the last round of the scenario that you have decided to play, and at that point you assess victory based on the number of production points that each player controls.
Yes, yes, yes. This is a fun, strong design. I definitely enjoy playing this game. And I loved, well, first, the things that I like about block war games, all here, which is the variety of different information that you can have, which is what I would call the Columbia system. I don't even know that they call it that way, but it is a set of general ideas that you find in many Columbia war games, which is the units attack in a certain order from within a group, within each group one defender before the attacker, unless you do something cool that allows you to attack first. Limited number of rounds in combat, and then the attacker has to retreat. All of these things you may be familiar with, and all of these are good. I like them in other games. I'm happy to find them here, and they also, of course, make learning new games in the system easier. So all the things that I like about the system are in here. And those are simply a lot of interesting decisions with a very simple, very economic game engine. Because, well, if I know the alphabet, I'm gonna place the pieces in the battle in order, and I'm gonna roll in that order. And yet still there are decisions, of course, that have to do with who is gonna be there, where I'm going to attack, what kind of combination of different units I'm gonna have. And when it comes to the Pacific, it's a very complete theater of operations. You have them all. You have the air, you have the sea, under the sea, you have land, you have them all. And a system like this allows you to take care of representing such a huge and different number of units in a way that still gives each unit its own personality but remains playable. So from the point of view of the game system, it's great that we have what I liked in previous games, and maybe you did too, and it also really allows you to hardwire a lot of the complexity of the theme in the game pieces and in very simple mechanics. What I like that is new and different from other games is the sandboxy quality of the game. Especially if you play the full scenario, there is really a lot that you can do. As the Japanese player, the world, the Pacific is your oyster. Just so many things that you can do or that you want to do. After all, that's kind of your idea. You want to take it off. And so in different games, the Japanese player can try to explore different options to push towards Australia or simply towards the southeast of Asia, try to go towards India. How about blocking the American reaction from the beginning, that they solidify your position in the little key points in the center of the Pacific? Just a lot of different things that can happen, and again, with a lot of interesting challenges when it comes to really managing the logistics. Now, it is true from the logistical point of view, there is a little more complexity than in a lot of other games based on the same system. Again, because ships will move in different ways from aircraft and will have different requirements, and naval unit and land units. You can't just send them to swim wherever you want. So there is that added level of complexity, but I believe it is really worth it when you get to the increased level of, again, of flexibility that you have. For a modicum of increased complexity, you have a considerably larger increase in strategic possibilities, in gameplay flexibility. Again, the Japanese player will want to do everything but won't be able to, and so the Japanese player will have to choose where to put the emphasis, or try a little bit of a more stretched approach, because of course if you concentrate in one area, then the opponent will try to surround you. If you extend all of your front, great, you're protecting your flanks, but again, the front is easier to puncture. As the Japanese player, also you have a problem. You have an advantage at the beginning. Your units are very strong, and the units of the allies are unprepared, so they're very weak. They start all reduced, but they are gonna catch up. Their production points are much higher, and so they're gonna start reduce units, bring in new units. And so the Japanese player is really pivotal that you make some considerable progress early in the war. Otherwise, simply the constant production momentum of the opponent will crush you at the end. And then you will see your empire start shrinking as the game progresses, which really feels right. I mean, that's what we expect here. It really fits well with the theme, with the historical background that the game tries to capture. It is true that the game can be challenging as a Japanese player, but I also believe it can be a lot of fun, because ultimately you are the one that is setting the stage with your initial pushes, with your initial conquests, well, then you're creating a situation and then the ally player will have to deal with, to respond to. But at the same time, doesn't mean that the role of the active player is passive, because yes, early on you're biding your time, you're trying to contain the Japanese advance as you're in fact waiting for your production machine to give an advantage. But then from time to time there are different things that maybe you can do. You see a weakness in the front and you try to exploit that. You see different supply lines that you can cut, as it should be. Supply lines are extremely important in the game. So the role for the ally player is not a passive one. It's not just let's wait until I win at the end, because you have to preserve that advantage in order to be able to do so. So in general, I find Pacific Victory to be a very strong design. It has all of the things that I like in Columbia War Games, with a lot of flexibility. Again, a sandbox, Pacific War feel to it. Just so many different things that you can do, different places that you can do, again you can go, and different possibilities to explore. It is more complex than most other games by Columbia War Games that are they're well known for their entry-level war games. At the same time, it is not daunting. I still consider this one an entry-level war game, definitely suitable for beginners, although for beginners that are willing to read a couple of extra pages of manual before they get started. But definitely still very, very suitable to beginners, and yet also with a lot of interesting things for the seasoned wargamer. Definitely a game that is rewarding because of the enormous variety of things that can happen. It is you can play the whole Pacific campaign in a single night, so maybe a little bit of a long night, but you can do it, and that is not something you can do with every war game, especially not with every war game with this theme. The other games, and you may know a famous one by Mark Herman, with the same theme, with the same scope, with the same scale. That is simply a daunting, scary monster game to play. And again, with a topic of this kind, is remarkable and admirable that we have a game that allows us to play that theme in a game that is still manageable and, more important than anything else, enjoyable. Pacific Victory 2nd edition. I don't know anything about the first one, but I know that I like this one.